Hello again and welcome back to our course on Access 2013. In this section we're going to take a bit of a lightning tour of this contact list. We've referred to several features of it so far in the course, but it is in effect a working database application. It's a desktop database, and I'd like to go through basically what it can do and explain some of the terminology we're going to use later on in the course. After this section and from then onwards we're going to be going into quite a bit of detail, so this is a chance to get a bit of a broad overview of what a desktop database looks like in Access 2013. Now the first thing I want to do is to just hide the navigation pane for the moment, and I'm also going to minimize the ribbon, and we're going to look at this contact list, because what this database is about is a contact list. Now at the moment we are looking at this contact list in what's called form view, and if you look down at the status bar, the left hand end, it says form view. If I right click on the contact list tab, I have an alternative of going into what's called layout view or going into what's called design view. Now design view basically determines how the contact list is designed, and I can use the information about contacts in different ways. I can lay it out in different ways, and I'll be coming back to the design later on. But when it's in form view, the contact list is shown on the screen in such a way that I could actually add data. So if I wanted to add a contact, all I would need to do is to click in the first free field there, and I'm going to just put in the first name of John, last name Doe, and I can go through and put in information about a person by clicking from field to field. And my first person is John Doe. Now once I start typing into that form, another line below it opens up. It says new, and if I wanted to put a second person in, I could start typing the second person's details on the next line. But let's go back to John's details. I've got John Doe, company, I've got to drop down, oh that's empty, so I'll say he works for Acme Inc. Job title, drop down, empty as well, I'll say he's a director. Category, it says personal, let's say he's actually a business contact. Put in his email address. Put in his business phone number. If I've got a home phone number, I can put it in there. If I've got a mobile or cell phone number, I can put it in there. Zip postal code, I'll leave those for now. So what I've done is to enter some of the details about one person. Now while I've been doing that, you may have noticed this little pen on the left here. And what this pen tells me when it's highlighted like this is that this particular record is in progress. I'm typing in the details, but I haven't actually finished entering the details yet. And there are various ways that I might finish entering the details. One of the ways that I can finish entering the details is just by clicking on the next row. And if I click on the next row, what happens is the little pen disappears, and I now have a person in my database. Person I've got is John Doe. Now notice at the bottom of the workspace there is a scroll bar down there. I've been using it to scroll left and right through the pieces of information about John Doe. If I go right back to the left again, I can see first name John, last name Doe, and so on. So what I've done is to add a record to my contact management database. Now one of the very helpful things about this particular database is that apart from that way of adding data, on the contact list form there is an entry here that says new contact, and if I click on new contact, watch what happens. What I get is a form, a dialog form, a contact details dialog. And in this I can add the same sort of information that I added just now, but I have a dialogue to do it in. So if I wanted to add somebody else, like for instance Jane Doe, company, well, oh look, there's Acme. Now Jane doesn't actually work for Acme, but as if by magic, Acme, the company I added just now for John, has appeared on this drop down list. Now Jane is not an employee of Acme. What about job title? Well look, director's popped up there as well. That wasn't there just now. Now I could go through now and put in the other kinds of detail for Jane. So let's give Jane a home phone number. Let's assume she's a personal contact. Let's go up there and check the list. Yeah, personal, business, family. Let's say she's a personal contact. That's fine. Let's put Jane's and then there are other pieces of information that I could add about Jane within this same dialogue. But let's suppose that that's enough for now, and let me click on Save and Close. Watch what happens. If I now look back at my contact list form, Jane has been added there. So although I didn't add Jane using this form, you can see her on the form. So that's two different ways of adding a contact to my contact management database. Now let me just open up the navigation pane again and go back to the section Forms. Now you'll see that there are actually 3 forms there, and we've seen 2 of them in action. And although they both can be used to add contacts, they're very different forms. The contact list form, the one that you can see there, has a view whereby you can see the contacts as rows in a table, or what's normally referred to as a data sheet in Access. And then the contact details form, which is a dialogue type form. Let me just go into design view for that again. You see everything laid out as a single dialogue that you can use primarily to add a new contact to the database. So there are 2 forms. They look very different. They have some functions in common and they have some functions that are different. Now there is a 3rd form there called Getting Started. And if I just open the Getting Started up, you'll see that that is more to do with help, explaining how to get started with contacts. So welcome to the Contacts Management Database. This is not primarily about adding a contact or looking at existing contacts. It's really about giving you some help. And actually in this particular form it's got links through to some videos explaining how to use the database. So there are forms that are not only used for maintaining data, but they can be used for information or for giving help. Now again, that's the sort of form in an Access database where we would design it and we would add the functionality to it, including things like these links here, these hyperlinks that take you through to other parts of the system. So they're the forms in this database. Let's go up to have a quick look at tables. So let's close the contact list, and under tables the first table is called contacts. Now generally speaking, to open something in Access 2013 you can either right click and there's almost always an open at the top, or you can just double click and it'll open. Now when we have a table open, we're actually looking at data, and in this database there really is only one table of data. There's another table over there called settings, but I'll talk about settings in a little while. This is at the moment where all of the data in this contact management database is stored. It's effectively like a huge Excel spreadsheet. It has a number of rows, horizontal rows, and each row represents one person, one contact. Now for each row or each record there are a number of columns, and each column is one field, what we sometimes call an attribute. So for Jane Doe, who's the 2nd row in our table, the company attribute is blank, the last name attribute is Doe, the first name attribute is Jane, and so on. Or we might say that for John, the value in the job title field is director. And that's how we refer to the individual cells in this spreadsheet, in this open table. Now when we come to design and build databases, one of the most fundamental tasks is to actually decide what data we're going to keep, and then to decide which table or tables to put the data into. It would be an extremely simple database that only had one table, and many business level databases will have probably dozens of tables. We're going to be dealing with examples in this course with 2, 3, 4 tables maybe, not too many more than that, but once you've got the principles, extending those to a larger number of tables is not particularly difficult, although it can be quite time consuming and it does involve quite a lot of attention to detail. Now this table, the contacts table, we've got open, but now I want to go into design view. So if I right click on the contacts tab there and go into design view, we'll get a completely different view of this table. And the first thing to bear in mind is that we don't see any data at all in this view. This is the view where we're looking at the design of the contacts table. And we have each field in the table defined, and for each field we've got a sort of grid at the bottom with information about that field. Now this is what we're going to look at in detail in a couple of sections time. We're going to look at table design in a lot of detail, but let's just take one example here to get the general principles. Let's take the example of the last field there, category. Now the category field has a data type of short text, and being short text, it means it's a field with some text in it. It'll just be regular words. In the table at the bottom it tells us that the field size is 100, which means that the most text you can have in there is 100 characters. And then there are a load of properties related to that. For instance, if I go down there, is this field required? No, it isn't. If I then click on the second tab down the bottom here, lookup, it says you're going to look up the possible values here from a list, and the list is personal, business and family. And that's why when we were putting that data in earlier on, you could see that list with personal, business and family. Now that's a pretty lightning quick look at one table, and in fact one field within one table, but hopefully that gives you some idea of what's involved in designing a table of data. Now one thing you may have noticed is that as I'm now in design view of the contacts table, I've got a contextual tab at the top. I've got the design tab in the table tools. If I finish looking at the contacts table in design view, just click on the close box there. Bear in mind I've made no changes. If I want to open that table again, but this time to look at the data, don't forget I can just double click on it. I get table tools again, but this time I get a fields tab and a table tab. So again, you can see how depending on what we're doing, what we're looking at, we will get different ribbon tabs, including contextual tabs as well. Now there are one or two things about this database that I'm not going to look at the moment. I'm not, for instance, going to look in detail at queries. We're going to come back to queries later on. In fact, this particular database is one we're going to use for a good few examples to get us started on various topics later on. But I would like to look at reports next, because sometimes what you want from a database is a report, a sort of snapshot of information from the database. And if I take this particular report here, it's called directory. As with most of the objects that we deal with in Access databases, if I want to design it, I'll right click and go into design view. But if I just want to look at a report, I can just double click on it to open it. Let's open this directory report. And what you see is a full alphabetical contact list, and this shows the list of the people in the database in some kind of alphabetic sequence and with a selection of the information about each person shown. And as with a form, as with a table, there are mechanisms within Access to design reports. I could have a report showing all the people in the database, just the people of a certain age, just the men, just the women, just the people who work for a particular company, and I can choose an extract of the data, and that incidentally is one of the things that we use queries for, and I could produce a report containing the information I want in the sequence I want, and perhaps dated for the day that I want as well. Now there's a second report there which is called Phone Book. Let me just double click on Phone Book. Phone Book is the same people are in it, but the information is presented in a different sequence. Phone Book, business is one list, personal is another. And if I added more people to the contacts table and ran either or both of those reports again, of course they'll always show me the latest information with the way that they're designed at the moment. Now, particularly if you're new to databases, or at least new to Access, I hope that quick overview of some of the main features of an Access database has been useful to you. And the general principles in there are ones that are going to be very important from now on. Before we start going into the details of how to design and create a database though, I'd like to look at web apps, because this is the fundamental new feature in Access 2013, and although the principles behind the databases that you build in web app form is exactly the same as the ones that you've just seen, the finished product, and to a large extent how it works, has some differences, and they're not all subtle differences either. So in the next section we're going to have a look at web apps. I'll see you then.